and fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gates. Useless. The title above this psalm, it says that this is a psalm or a song of ascent by Solomon. Solomon is the king over Israel. He was David's son. Solomon wrote a lot of the Proverbs, but he's also got a book, Ecclesiastes. If you've ever read the book, one of the most famous things in it is vanity, or meaningless. It starts out like this. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem, vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. NIV says meaningless, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What if I got up one morning, like today, and I just said everything is meaningless? I mean, it says the words of the preacher. This is how he starts out the book. Everything is meaningless. The house that you've worked so hard to build, or that you're trying to pay off, is meaningless. The security that you try to provide for your family, it's meaningless. The hard work that you put in for food, all of it is meaningless. How would that make you feel? I mean, the question is everything meaningless? The answer is yeah, if God's not in it. But the answer is no, if God is involved. If God is involved, then there's meaning. If God is absent, there is no meaning. Think about it. Society tries to figure out what is the meaning of life, and if God is not in the picture, there's really no meaning. That's why Ecclesiastes would go along and says, well, eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow we die. Life would be meaningless without God. But within this verse, especially verses 1 through 2, there is some important truths that I think we should point out. And the first one is this, that God is still working. Because it says that if God does not build the house, then the builder builds in vain. God did not stop his work at creation. He didn't just create everything that we see, take a step back and let everything just go how it will. He's still working. God just didn't work in the Old Testament in the lives of David and Solomon and Elijah and Elisha, but he is still working today. He is still actively involved in our life today. That should give us some encouragement. And when we look at that first verse about God building, if God does not build, then the builder builds the house in vain. Building the house there, it can refer to two things. It can refer to one's dwelling, our home, is where we live, where we sleep. But also, oftentimes throughout Scriptures, when it's referring to building a house, it's also referring to building a family line. So unless God is building our family, parents, we can do everything that we can. It will still all be in vain. If God is not within it, it's all in vain. And part of the way that God works now is he works in us, he works with us, and he works through us. So the message here is very clear. What it's teaching us is the only place that we find true security, the only place that we can find a true family, how it was meant to be designed, the only way that we can find essential food is through him. It's the only way. Every other way is meaningless and And building a family, it's not easy. It's hard work. And without God in the midst of it, without God building that family, the family will never be what the family was designed to be. So one of the important truths is that God is still working. The other thing is God makes our work meaningful. I mean, you don't have to be full-time in ministry for God to make your work meaningful. You don't have to be out on the streets witnessing to people. Whatever you do, wherever you are, God can make your work meaningful. Be a construction worker. Be a school teacher. You could be a coal miner. You could work in the hospital. Whatever you do, God can make that work meaningful. That's why Paul says in Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, work heartily, as for the Lord, and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. So it teaches us that when we serve wherever we're at, in our workplace or wherever, we are to work as if we were working for the Lord, because ultimately we are. We are serving Him. And nothing that we do as we serve Him is meaningless or in vain. He never forgets any good deed that we do on His behalf or for Him. It has an impact. It's meaningful. Which also means that God rewards our work. We see that in the Scripture. He says He gives to His beloved sleep. So He gives us the rest that we need, because oftentimes, I don't know about you, but when I don't focus on God, my mind starts focusing on everything else around me, and I can't sleep. I'll stay up most of the night, or I will sleep for 2 hours, and I'll be up the rest of the night. But when you focus on God, you have rest. Remember several weeks ago we looked at one of the Psalms, and it says that He neither sleeps nor slumbers. And I said, one man talked one time and said that he doesn't sleep so that we can. He gives His beloved sleep. And it's a very beautiful picture here, especially coming from Solomon. Because Solomon, as we said, was King David's son. And when Solomon was born, Solomon sent Nathan, the prophet, to David. And God's personal name for Solomon was Jedediah. He sent Nathan and he says, go and call Solomon Jedediah. Jedediah means beloved of the Lord. So when Solomon says he gives sleep to his beloved, he's using the name that God had given him. He's making it personal. God gives me the rest that I need. He's remembering that God is calling him beloved. It's the same encouragement that we need, that God does reward us with the rest that we need. But also we understand that God rewards us in heaven. When this life is over, He will have the rewards go up for you. I don't know what they may be, but I can tell you they're far greater than anything we could ever imagine. Now we get to verses 3 through 5. And it says, behold, the children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Like the arrows in the hand of a warrior are children of one's youth. Now when you look at these two sections, verses 1 through 2 and then 3 through 5, it really doesn't seem like they fit together. I mean, a lot of commentaries will say, well, these seem to be two different psalms just kind of brought together. Because it goes from from building, it goes from watching over the city to working for your food. All of that is in vain without God. And then it goes, but children are a heritage of the Lord. They don't seem to go together in our mind. And the reason being is because we're not thinking like the ancient Jewish people were thinking. Because the way that they were thinking, they don't think like us. We compartmentalize everything. We have work, and then we have our family. We go to work, we do everything that we need to do, then we come home and we have our family. The Jews didn't think that way. They didn't have two different sections. It was all together, and they would be asking the question, well, why would we be building anything if it wasn't for the family? Oh, why would anybody want to watch over the city if the family wasn't in it? We're in it. It's not the questions we usually ask. Because we usually have the two different aspects of our life. Work and family. But theirs were together. They understood that the family was the basic unit and the most important element of society. And it still is. You know, oftentimes we forget that. I love these two Psalms, this one and the next one for next week. This one starts out with the protection of the city and ends with the family. Next week starts out with the family and ends with the protection of the city. And what that teaches us is just how vital the family is. Just how important the family is. Because the welfare of the city all depends on how the families are functioning. And it's the same with us today. The welfare of the city, the welfare of our nation, the welfare of everything that we see depends on the welfare of the family. Because the family is so important. That the scriptures teach us that children are a reward, or children are a blessing from God. The family is the vital foundation, the building block for a thriving society. God knew that. The Jewish people kind of understood it, but we have oftentimes forgotten. The children were blessing. The family was a blessing. And not only is children a blessing from God, but children are a blessing to us. As it goes on and it says, blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gates. Now the gate is oftentimes where they would have their court. If there was a lawsuit or a crime that was committed, the court would take place at the gates. So one of the meanings could be that it's good when you have a good family with a good reputation that can help defend you when you find yourself in trouble. But another meaning could be that the gates is where the enemies come to. And it's a blessing when we have a family that is there to be a source of strength and encouragement when the enemy comes to attack. Children are a blessing. And you don't have to be a parent to know that children are a blessing. You don't have to be a parent to invest your time and effort into the children. You can still pray for them. You can still put your time and effort trying to teach them and set them an example. And you can love them. Because oftentimes that's what they do. I want to look at this passage again, but I want us to look at it now in light of the New Testament. In light of what Jesus revealed to us in his life. And when we look at that, oftentimes the house is in reference to the church. If God is not building the church, then we can do all that we can, but it's all in vain. When we look in the New Testament, who builds the church? You could say, well, the apostles went out, they taught, and they did everything that they could. They witnessed to people, they did miracles. But when you look at it, God added to the number day by day those who were being saved. God was the one building the church, not the men. And the question is, if God stepped out of the church, would we even notice? Because I think there's a lot of churches that are surviving, not thriving, surviving, but they never ever rely on God. And if God would say, okay, well, I'll just let you do your thing, I am gone, would they even notice that He was gone? Would we even notice if He was gone? Are we that reliant on Him, or are we trying to do it all ourselves? If we are, it's all in vain. The watchers, the watchmen over the city, over the church, oftentimes is referring to the leaders of the church. And if the leaders are not relying on God for the strength and the wisdom and the knowledge to be able to watch over the flock, they're doing it all in vain. Many children have been lost. Many churches have been destroyed because the watchmen weren't watching. And my fear at times is that we place so much on the leaders. We expect them to do so many things that we never expect them to actually pray. We expect them to be busy. We expect them to be, we see them doing something, but we never expect that they are spending time in prayer. That's what I mean. If we were to step out, or if God were to step out, would we notice? Because we're not relying on Him and we're trying to do everything ourselves. The children are us, are the Christians. And blessed is the church who fills His quiver with them. Because when the enemy comes to the gate, we will have a family who will be here to support one another. When the attacks come, we will not fail. Because we have built our foundation on God. And we have allowed Him to be the builder. Allowed Him to help us as we watch over each other. We rely on Him, because if not, everything is useless. But when we see the coming of Christ, we see what He did on our behalf, when we rely on Him, we understand that we're not useless. That what we do is not meaningless. That we count for something. The death on the cross, the extent that he was willing to go, shows us that we are worth